Hi guys, thanks for joining today. Today is day 8 of the 30-day online training. Yesterday we completed our discussions on conditional statement where we actually did a little project, just a mini project to showcase how you can actually use if and the and statement, or if you want to use or, depending on what your requirements are. Today we'll be going to mass function. We will not be doing very complex mathematics, but for today and tomorrow we'll just be looking at how you actually can handle numbers, and how you can round off the number, how you can just pick which is the highest in a list, how you can rank your numbers, and things like that. So that's what we'll be doing today and tomorrow. And I've actually listed out the functions we'll be covering here, from the integer function, truncate function, rand function, round up, round down. I'll be explaining each of those. And we'll be doing that from 1. So it's actually quite the long list. So we'll just be starting between 1 and 8 today. That's why I've actually given the description. Because for even an ardent Excel user, these functions can sometimes be confusing. That's why I decided that, okay, it's best we speak to each one of them individually and just look at a couple of examples for each function. So we'll be looking at from 1 to 8, which is the floor function today. Then tomorrow we'll be looking from the modular function to the maximum function. So for the first one, the integer function, basically what the integer function does for you is it helps you to round down a number and return an integer only. So what it does, it looks like the number, it looks at the number you've given it, then it picks the closest number that is lower than it, more like you're going down. So if you're picking integer function, it's going to strip it of all the decimal places. Okay, but unlike the rand function, it would not actually round it up to the high number. Remember, when you are rounding off numbers or rounding up numbers, if a number is between 1 to 4, you round it down. If it's between 5 to 9, you actually round it up. But for the integer, you don't round up. You just go to that. You just try to maintain the integer that is holding the decimal places, and you know it's more like you're going lower. So if you have 13.5, for example, 13.5, normally if you want to round this off, you should be getting 14. But what the integer would do, integer function would do, is to actually round it off to 13, more like it will clear off this decimal place. So let's try that. Just do int and then pick the number. So it takes only one parameter. It takes only one parameter and strip. So sometimes when you need to strip off decimal places from a number and actually use it as an integer, this would actually come in handy. But there is something you need to note about the integer function, and that is if you're dealing with negative number. Okay, so if I have, say, negative 3.1, now if I'm actually using the integer number here, what happens is it actually takes me to 4 as the answer, and minus 4, or rather. And the reason it does that is because, remember, minus 3.0 is greater than minus 3.1, right? So because minus 3.0 is greater than minus 3.1, it cannot actually round it up to 3.0. So what it will do, it will round it down to that lower number, which in this case is minus 4. But sometimes when you just want it to maintain the integer in front of it, you don't want it to round down like this, that is when you can actually use the trunc function, the truncation function. So these two examples here, covers the integer function. Okay, but if I want to actually do this and I want it to appear like return minus 3 for me instead, then I can actually use the trunc function. The trunc function works exactly like the integer function, only that in this time there is that consideration for negative numbers. So the trunc function would just remove the decimal and every number after it away from it. So it will return an integer, but it will truncate all the decimal places. That's what the trunc function will do for you. So for trunc function, if I say trunc is equals to trunc of 13.5, it returns 13 also. Then if I say trunc of minus 3.1, it returns minus 3. So this is what trunc will do for you. So you can actually find use cases for either of this function, because sometimes you need to ensure that if there is a decimal above the number, you just want it to go to the lower number. In that case, the integer function would work well. But sometimes you just want it to throw away the decimal place. You don't want to know whether it's rounding it up or rounding it down. You just want to throw away that decimal place. That's when the trump function will work perfectly for you. But then we have another function called the RAND function. The RAND function is more like you're rounding off number normally, because if you're working between any decimal place between 1 to 4, it rounds it off up, or it rounds it down rather. Then between 5 to 9, it actually rounds it off. So if you have 13.5, for example, RAND function will make it 14, but if you have 13.1, it will make it 13. Okay. Now, another thing you should notice, because the trump function is like integer function, it also takes only one parameter. So if you notice here, I will only supply a single parameter to it here. But for the RAND function, it actually takes two parameters. For RAND function, let me show you that. RAND function. And also you can use the RAND function to also, not only for decimal places, but to also determine significant numbers. So sometimes you want to round off. In mathematics we talk about rounding to the nearest significant number, nearly to the nearest tens, to the nearest hundreds, and things like that. Let me show you. I actually need more space because it will take more. Okay, so if I say, and this one will be using two parameters. Let me separate it so it will be clear. I wouldn't want it to disturb I wouldn't want it to confuse you. So let's pick the RAND function. Okay, so in this case I will be using two parameters. We can call this parameter 1 and of course this is parameter 2. Okay, now I will explain let the output be here. I will explain what each parameter stands for. Now remember, when you want to round off a number, you actually need to get the number you want to round. Then you have to get the number of significant places or number of decimal places you want to round. Do you understand? Now that is what this does for you. So for example, if I have 13 point, let's just say random numbers, this is the parameter, and all I want to do is to round it to 2 decimal places. What do? You can come here, you just say the RAND function, you pick this number separated by a comma with this the parameter 2, which is the number of digits you want to round off to. Can you see what happens? So it has rounded it off to 2 decimal places. Let's do the same thing again and say, okay, this time round it to just 1 decimal place. Not what will happen. So I'll say RAND again, this number, comma, the other number. Can you see it has rounded it off 1 decimal place? Now, what if I make this 0? What it means is I don't want to have any decimal place. So that's 0 decimal places. But then, what if I want to do significant numbers? Let's do this. Random number, this, okay? And then, let's say I want to round it to the nearest tens. Now, when you are rounding a number off to the nearest tens. So, how do I do that? I just say is equals to RAND. Sorry, okay, I'm rounding to the nearest 10, so let's say I'm going to put -1 here. Okay, so I'll say RAND, then I'll pick this number and I say comma. Can you see what happens? So it has rounded up the 3 here. First it has cleared away all the decimal points, but then it's still rounding up this 3, and because 3 is less than 5, it basically just rounds it down to 0. Can you see? That's why you have this answer here. Okay, if I want to round off to say the nearest 1000, I can use this same number and basically say nearest 1000. I just say -3 because 1000 has 3 zeros, right? Okay, then I apply the same formula. Can you see that? So it has rounded it off to the nearest 1000. So what this basically means is this second parameter determines whether you want to round off to the nearest decimal place or to a particular number of decimal place or to significant figures. So what this does is it runs it to significant figures when you actually use the minus sign in front of your second parameter. But if crazy you're using just a parameter that is whole number, it rounds up just the decimal places behind it. So I hope you actually understand that function. So we'll take another function also. Now round up. Round up is just like the round function. The only difference is instead of it to round down, it will always round up. So even if you have 13.2, remember 13.2 here, when we rounded it up to zero significant figures, or sorry, to zero decimal places, it rounded it up to 13. But if we use round up, whether it is a dot one or something, it's going to push it up to the nearest number up. It's more like, okay, when you say, it's more like you go to the store. Imagine you go to the store really, and then your money is say like say 45 naira 2 kobo or something, or let's even say your money is like 41 naira. You can actually give the cashier 40 naira because what it means is deficit, but what you can do is you can drop 50 naira. So this, in this case, it actually rounds it up to the higher number, if you remember. So what we'll do is, let me show you how this works. I'll just come here and then update this formula. It also takes 2 parameters, works the same way. Can you see what happens? So even this 4 behind, because you are rounding up, it changed this 3 to 4, even though the 4 behind it is not up to 5. Okay, so if you do that to all this, notice what will happen. Here 13.2 became 14 because it's rounding up. So it would always go up, it would not come down, even if it's a .01. Okay, and in this case, here a .4 also became, you know, to the nearest 43 became 50. If you notice, then here 243 became 5,000 instead. So it's rounding up. This is an example of how you can actually use the round up function. And then I'm sure you already understand what the round down would do with this kind of formula. If we now round down, so I don't need to take more time on it. Round down, we just, you know, push it down. It's going to cancel every decimal place, every decimal, without, you know, rounding up. If it's 13.9, it would not round it up, it would just round it down. It doesn't matter what the number that follows it would be. So let me show a typical example here. So here is 2344. So even if I say 23999, can you see? So it ignored the 999, even though it's closer to .24, but it will always round it down. That's the way it works for. That's the way it works for what's the name? That's the way it works for round up. Okay, so I hope you round down rather. My bad. I should have corrected this. Okay, so now I hope you understand the difference between rounding, the round function, the round up function, and the round down function. It's very important you understand that. Then another function I would like us to look at is actually the Emerand function. Okay, now what the Emerand function does is it actually also takes 2 parameters, but then it rounds up to multiples. Okay, remember 10 is not divisible by 3 in whole numbers, right? If you do 10 divided by 3, for example, you will get 3.333, right? But what the round-up function can do, what the Emerand rather function can do for you, it can find the nearest whole number to that particular function, or to that particular number that you assign to it. Let me put it here. I don't want to move away from the screen so we can still be looking at our functions. So I'll just copy this and let me paste it here, so we can still put it here. Okay, in this case we are looking at the Emerand. Okay, and it takes 2 parameters also, like I said. So if I say something like, now I can change this to whole number so you actually would understand more. Let's make this say okay, 10 is, let's make this 11, let's make this 45, let's make this, you know, random numbers, and then 21. Okay, so we'll take the parameters one by one. For 11, let's use parameter 2 so I can use that to explain. Now if I come here and put Emerand, basically, and I pick this number up, comma 2, the multiple. Okay, can you see? So it basically knows that you can divide 2 by 12, but you can't actually divide 2 by 11. So what it does, it takes you to the closest number that 2 is divisible by. Do you understand? So it takes you to the closest number that 2 is divisible by. So if I make this, say for example 3, because 3 is also, 11 is close to 12. And if I make it 4, it will also be 12, right? But what if I make it 5? Look at what happened. So it came down to 10 instead of going to 15, because there are actually 4 number gaps between 11 and 15, but there's only 1 number gap between 11 and 10. So it just came down to 10, that okay, the closest decimal or the closest multiple of this parameter 2 to this is actually 10. So you can divide 10 by 5 conveniently. That would give you 2, right? But immediately, let's say for example I change this to 13. See what happens. It moved it to 15, because 15 is now closer to 13 than actually is closer to 10. So I hope you understand how this function works. For example, now let me put a 7 here and put the formula here also, Emerand. This divided by. Before I press enter, can you guess what it will give me as an answer? So if you look at it very well, 7 times 6 will give you a 42. Whereas 7 times 7 will give you a 49. But which is closer to 7? Which is closer to 45 rather, between 42 and 49. Apparently 42 is closer, right? So what do you expect to get? Of course you will get a 42 in this case. So in case you want to find the multiple of a number closest to another number, especially when you're solving things like fractions and things like that, and then you need to calculate what's the lowest common multiple, or you want to know the multiple that is closest to a number, this function works in perfectly in that kind of case. So it tells you the closest number that is a multiple of that number, instead of you just dividing it. So if I put 1 2 3 here, this is a big number, and if I now say okay, what's the multiple closest, Emerand, okay, this number of 1 2 3, you understand? It actually tells me 5 2 3 9 8. I hope you basically understand how this works. So if I come here also and put a 2 here, okay, and I say Emerand, before I press enter, you can guess what the answer would be. What do you think the answer would be? 22. Can you see that? Now, the answer here is 22, but look at this particular scenario. Look at this particular scenario. You know that 20 and 22 actually are close to 21. I mean, it's just 1 between them. But then it has decided to pick the upper one. So why are you not thinking of, why is it not picking the lower one? Now that's the way Emerand works. But then sometimes you need it to pick the lower one that is closest to it. The lower one that is always close. That's the lower multiple that is close to it. And that's when you can actually use something like the floor function. So the floor function is just like the Emerand function, but in this case it will round it up. Let me round it down rather, just like floor. Floor is down, ceiling is up. Okay, so let me run that for you. So in this case I'll say floor function, okay, this number comma this number. Hold on. Okay, I think there's a variable for it called the floor.mat. It's different from this one is just rounding off to significant, but we're using the floor.mat for this particular version of Excel. That's Excel. I'm running on Excel 2013. The floor function has been deprecated. So let's just do this. Come on, 5, 10.